So you want to main Mr. Fantastic. Reed Richards is a stretchy character who definitely can handle all that. So as somebody who has solo queued to the top 500 and grandmaster as Fantastic, now it's time for me to teach you how to handle him, unlike the way he handles walking like he's pooped his pants. Mr. Fantastic is a bit of a weird hero because it says he's a duelist, but in most cases I'd call him an off tank or a support rather than a duelist or vanguard. A lot of people seem to think that having a Mr. Fantastic on your team means that you don't need a tank or that you just need one. These people are wrong. When Mr. Fantastic is played right, with appropriate space and support, when you get into a more chaotic fight, then he can be an insanely valuable tool both for overall damage, suppression, stalling the point, and defending the backline. All things an off-tank can do. So let's go over how his abilities work so you can start popping off on him as well. Mr. Fantastic's primary fire, Stretch Punch, throws out long, stretchy fists that smack an enemy within range, which at the time of this video is 15 meters. The fists are active a little bit before and a little bit after the punch animation, meaning you can swing your aim around and hit anyone else it connects to within the range of the same punch and obviously the timing. There's no damage fall off per hit, and at the time of this video, every hit deals 60 damage at a rate of about 1 hit a second, which means that if you're hitting every enemy in the enemy team in one swipe, you could deal over 360 damage every second or so, which is actually more than somebody like Punisher in his ultimate, but obviously that's a different kind of damage. The Stretch Punch also doesn't go through shields, and if you try dragging it through a shield, it kind of gets stuck. Also, it is worth to mention that the Stretch Punch does not hit the souls left by Doctor Strange's ult for some reason, so don't even try it, just go for the stunned enemies instead. It's pretty easy to do a wide swing on all of them because they're all just standing still. It also doesn't hit enemies being thrown around in the Hulk ult either. I don't know, it's probably some weird bug, but just so you know, every time you hit an enemy, you also gain 5 charge of elasticity, but more on what that means later. It's also worth mentioning that the added charge only applies once per hit, so hitting multiple enemies in one swipe won't give you more charge. And without even mentioning the rest of his abilities, or the rest of his kit for that matter, just slapping enemies around with his primary fire adds up to a lot of damage and a lot of ult charge. But we're going to move on with his secondary fire, Distant Grip, which works a little bit differently, but if it is used correctly, then it actually synergizes with his primary fire pretty well. Hitting your secondary fire throws another fist forward, and if it touches an enemy, then it can be followed up with hitting your primary fire again, either on the same enemy to pull them towards you, or against another enemy to throw them into each other. The Distant Grip deals 20 damage the first time it connects, and additional damage when pulling an enemy. If you pull a singular target, then it deals 50 damage and pulls them up to 10 meters towards you, and if you pull 2 enemies together, then they each take 30 damage. Using the Distant Grip also gives you 30 elasticity, which we will cover more about later. It's also worth mentioning that unlike your primary, the Distant Grip can't be pulled around. It keeps going in the direction that you aim it, so aim wisely. That being said, if you do hit the first part of the Distant Grip, then the game seems to be very forgiving in letting you hit the second, the follow-up, be it on the same target or on another. It seems to have a much larger hitbox, making those lineups pretty easy. Just kind of aim towards whoever you want to grab. Just keep in mind that the second hit works just like the first and not your primary, in the sense that it only expands forward and cannot be dragged if you miss. But as long as it is connected, then you can hit someone even over really far ranges, actually beyond your Distant Grip range, even if you get knocked back or if they dash backwards. I don't know the specifics here, but it just works, so trust me on that. I like using the Distant Grip like an additional source of damage for a full combo. I go for a quick primary, then I immediately follow it up with the secondary if it's off cooldown, and then another primary to do the full Distant Grip combo. I rarely go for the 2-man smack in a duel because it is a little bit more difficult to hit, and it isn't as reliable as just pulling one person, and it also doesn't deal as much damage if you're trying to kill a single target, so it's much safer, and I'm more likely to kill my target if I hit the same target twice instead. But that being said, depending on the enemy team, sometimes it makes a lot of sense to use the Distant Grip both on enemy support and your tank. This throws their supports out of position forward while also throwing their tanks backwards, which will give you the most team disruption per cooldown. Also, for some reason, if you pull a double pull on 2 targets, one with a smaller hitbox and one with a larger one, especially if one of them is maybe moving or jumping and the other one isn't, there's a higher chance of one of them getting slingshotted for some weird reason. And if you do get a slingshot off, that is a lot of team disruption for one cooldown. Thanks to its longer range and the fact that it keeps connecting after the range is broken, I also normally use the Distant Grip sort of to fish for connects. Most players don't expect the long range, so it really helps me get some surprise damage in, or maybe even yoink someone in who was trying to stay right outside of my range, or in, a safe range. You can also use the Distant Grip to help your teammates when in need. If someone dives your teammates, be it Black Panther or a tank, then quickly gripping them. Is that the word we're going with? Okay. will throw them off course, and it is oftentimes enough to save them from dying. And if not, then you usually want to combine it with your next ability, which we'll cover in a little bit. But I also want to add that the distant grip counters a lot of diver tanks. If you can time the pull properly, then you can cancel them from jumping away or jumping out. For example, a well-timed distant grip that pops during Venom's only grapple in every 8 seconds or so will essentially cancel it and leave him stationary on the ground, which turns him into a free kill. A distant grip will also cancel the build-up on Hulk's jump, which turns him completely stationary, unable to jump out. A common mistake I see a lot of people doing with the distant grip is spamming their primary when using it. I was doing the same thing for many hours, but it appears to be really clunky if you do this because it doesn't let you connect the second grab if you're still holding or spamming your primary key. So if you are going for a yoink in any form, being a solo or a double yoink, take a moment and let go of your primary key, at least for a little bit as you line this up, and then hit the first grab and then pull them in, and then you can start kind of spamming your primary key again. But anyways, moving on about that other ability I mentioned real quick, so if you're gonna bring it up again, that is Flexible Elongation. This ability lets Mr. Fantastic be all over the fight, both defending his teammates and attacking his enemies. It is also part of most combos that help you win your duels. Activating the ability sends Mr. Fantastic onto a target of his choice within 15 meters. Upon activation, Mr. Fantastic gets an additional 75 bonus health, and once he humps his target, they either really like it and also get 75 bonus health, or they hate it and they take 30 damage. You can carry 2 charges at a time that can be used in succession for a quick extra health boost for you and a teammate, or if you want to stick onto your target. Other than using this for the combo of primary fire, secondary fire, primary fire, dash, then primary fire and dash until necessary, I also like using this whenever I am defending my team. If I see a teammate about to get caught, then I usually dash to them to give them a little bit of extra health. If they get attacked by combo heroes like Magic that usually have just enough damage to pull a full combo on a squishy where a little bit of extra health would ruin their combo completely, then this is usually enough to save their life, especially if you follow it up with a grab and yoink afterwards. The Flexible Elongation is also perfect to get back onto the point if you are dying or running from spawn. Just keep dashing to your teammates if they are ahead of you. Even better, if you're playing with a teammate who has crazy movement abilities such as, I don't know, Spider-Man or Hulk or anyone with a dash, then you could also use your Flexible Elongation on them right before they jump or at the time of their jump. And if you time it right, then you will be able to follow them either all the way to the end of their dash or movement ability, or at the very least putting you very close. And generally speaking, you kind of just want to use the Flexible Elongation off cooldown in team fights. But a quick warning though, in most fights, try to avoid using the Flexible Elongation on your enemies unless you want to close the gap. Usually your teammates are there with you, and you'll gain way more value by using it on them instead, as using the Flexible Elongation on your enemy, it really just burns up to 60 health from their team's overall health pool while giving you 150. But if you use it on a teammate, that will give your team's health pool upwards of 300 bonus health instead. So obviously you'll gain more from helping a teammate that probably also deal more damage than you in general than just doing 30 damage on a random target. If a teammate near me is getting focused, it helps to think of it as an instant 150 health buffer. You can basically heal up your teammates and save them from death with the press of 2 buttons. Every time you use Flexible Elongation, then you also instantly get an additional 30 elasticity. Once you get 100 elasticity, you become Big Guy with more damage and health, but you'll be a lot slower. I'll cover the passive a little bit more in depth later, but I wanted to mention it for one pretty useful combo, which is that if you get 70 elasticity, then you're going to proc the Big Guy with the next Flexible Elongation. So if there is an opening to dive a squishy target or an enemy's backline, or if there's just a lot of room to make a play, then I usually dash in with 70 elasticity. This makes me dash up right next to the enemy that I want to duel, trigger Big Guy, and if I made the right call, then it turns into a free kill. As I'm recording, I also want to mention something else that might happen a lot more commonly is that I open a fight by using both of my Flexible Elongations, either on a teammate or enemy, or close the gap, and then never use the distant grip. In this case, I'll probably be at 70 or so elasticity without the Flexible Elongation cooldown. But if I want to trigger the Big Guy mode here, all I need to do is just use the distant grip to enter it. Doing it on the ground works just as well, if not better, if you need to pop it immediately. But if everything fails, then it usually helps if I can use the next ability, Reflexive Rubber. Activating Reflexive Rubber makes Mr. Fantastic stretch out and start walking like his shat his pants. You can walk around and even jump around while in this form. As long as Reflexive Rubber is active, then any incoming damage will be eaten up by Mr. Fantastic. This includes melee, area of effect abilities like Force Ultimate, line of sight abilities like Doctor Strange's or Scarlet Witch's Ultimate, or of course any type of projectile or hit scan coming your way. Entering the Reflexive Rubber activates sort of an iframe, so even if you take damage before the animation has finished, then it will be nullified. Incoming damage after the animation has finished counts towards your shield. You can absorb up to 300 damage or hold the form for 3 seconds. The rubber form can be cancelled at any time by hitting the ability key again, which fires out a projectile of the amount of damage that you have absorbed. If you didn't absorb anything, then it just kind of cancels. More often than not, enemies won't really shoot at the rubber form or shoot it a little bit by accident and stop shooting after. They usually don't expect you to shoot a projectile out until several seconds later, so canceling early might net you some surprising damage or maybe even a kill if they're not really paying attention. And just to clarify, since it isn't clear in game, any incoming damage gets absorbed. That includes damage from the front, the sides, or the back. If you're using this defensively just to stay alive, make sure to walk towards your teammates as you do so you can dash towards them as soon as your rubber form is gone. The rubber form converts 60% of all incoming damage into projectile damage, capping out at 180 damage. It is not enough to get a kill. But funny enough, this is one of Mr. Fantastic's only high impact abilities, as in one of those that can turn a fight. If you manage to get a fully charged projectile and hit a squishy, ideally the enemy supports or maybe somebody who's jumping around and taking a little bit of chip damage, then assuming you have good enough of a team, they are most likely going to die immediately afterwards. The Reflexive Rubber really sells the idea of an off tank, and many use it the wrong way. Normally, you're gonna want to use the rubber right after you come out of big guy or as you come out of ult, as you're probably going to take a lot of focus fire from the enemy team without a way to survive it. But there are a lot of creative ways that you can use it other than that. For example, you could stand in front of your teammates when they are stunned or caught. You can even dash to them beforehand to make sure you actually reach them. In this scenario, you can even use your flexible elongation to jump to your teammates if they get hooked, and then use your rubber form to save them from incoming bullets. This also gives you a projectile that might net you a trade or a pick. You can also use it to deflect certain projectile ultimates. I mean, sure, there's Magneto and Iron Man, everyone knows about those, but you can also stop Groot from hitting one with this as well. If your team does get hit by Groot, then you can usually pop your rubber form and soak up a lot of incoming damage as well, or deter enemies from shooting towards you, depending on where in the ult you end up. And if you're not in the ult yourself, you can still walk up and stand in front of it. I guess in general, you could consider it more of a shield for your teammates rather than just a shield for yourself to stay alive with. I've stood in front of ulting teammates that need cover with the rubber form, or in front of spider nests or BRBs that the enemies want to destroy, just to stall them out a little bit longer and giving my teammates a chance to burn them. Entering rubber form also immediately removes all of your horizontal momentum. This can help if you get spat out from something like a Jeff ult, or if you get hit by Winter Soldier's dash, or if you're getting thrown around and need to plant your feet on the ground. It is also worth noting that unlike most abilities that make you invulnerable, going into rubber form doesn't actually stop you from contesting the point. So if you need to stall the game out, using the rubber form might be the way. Rubber form can also be used in the middle of other abilities or animations. You can cancel your grip or your dash simply by hitting the rubber key. I've also started using the rubber form whenever I think a teammate is about to take a lot of damage, as this stops them from needing additional heals, and it also quickly charges my projectile if I time it right, which might net us an opening pick to win us that fight. But when I am trying to carry, properly charging up the rubber and securing a pick on one of the enemies, especially in the backlines, is going to be one of the best game changers that Mr. Fantastic has in his kit. I cannot stress this enough. As I started playing around the rubber form and getting kills with it, I started climbing and winning a lot more games than previously. High accuracy with these projectiles will lead to picks, which will lead to won fights. I really like trying to step in a line of fire and trying to grab a quick pick before the fight even starts off. It is a bit risky since you end up in the front line without your defensive cooldown, but it can easily win you the fight before it even begins. There's definitely a lot more ways you can use it. It's a very versatile ability, and I'm probably going to find more and eventually add it to a future version of the guide. But if you guys have good uses for the rubber form or anything else in this video that I haven't mentioned, let me know in the comments, because we're going to continue with the next ability, the one that really ties this kit together, Mr. Fantastic's passive, Elastic Strength. Elastic Strength triggers as soon as Mr. Fantastic hits 100 elasticity. For the next 6 seconds, you will receive 450 bonus health, your attacks deal more damage, and you hit slightly faster, but with a much shorter melee range of 8 meters. During the big guy mode, you also run 20% faster. The damage from big guy is pretty significant and works the same as his primary in the sense that you can drag it to hit more targets. So if you get into certain fights, then you can almost farm an entire ult off of the enemy team during one big guy power up. Unlike his primary fire in small guy mode, Mr. Fantastic's primary during big guy mode pierces shields. It will almost kill an entire Doctor Strange if you keep smacking him for the entire duration of the big guy mode, assuming he doesn't get peeled or heals. As I said, the big guy mode pops when you hit 100 elasticity, usually within the next 1 second or so of doing so, but you can delay the big guy form by using other abilities in between, like the distant grip, flexible elongation, and reflexive rubber, even your ultimate. And then after a second afterwards, basically by the time you would hit another punch, you will enter the big guy mode. This is especially useful if you accidentally pop the big guy mode but still need to close the gap to do any damage with your dash, or you just want to get out of the way. Whenever I pop my big guy, I normally jump forward and start taking space from the enemies. Odds are they're going to start backing up once they notice that I do pack a punch, and I want to stop them from getting out of my range too soon. That being said, since I do not have shields, then I usually end up having to play near walls as not to take too much unnecessary damage and get melted immediately. Especially when you keep in mind that most of big guy mode's health is actually bonus health that cannot be healed up by my healers. I also oftentimes end up helping my frontline if we have a mirror matchup of something like Doctor Strange or Magneto or both, as my additional damage through the shields makes it super easy for my own Strange to push forward and overpower the frontline, which can lead to a win. Sometimes I notice that the enemy Strange has a very big health advantage and is pushing to win the fight, in which case I come in as a big guy, I help my Strange out, and just punch the other guy to turn the fight back into our favor. You can cancel the big guy mode early by hitting the F key if you're on PC. I'm not sure what it is on controller or console. Canceling the mode takes you out of big guy mode, but keeps your shields for a little while after, and they slowly trickle down as you leave it. The thing is, big guy mode gives you a higher damage per second, but it makes you a much larger target. It gives you a way worse range, and you cannot use any of your abilities. So unless you have enemies to slap around that are within your very short range, then you are usually better getting off big guy mode as soon as possible. When you are in big guy mode, it also makes sense to keep an eye on your health. If all of your bonus health is burnt, then you might as well swap off big guy early, because you're just a bigger target who cannot peel for yourself or use any abilities. Getting comfortable and finding the rhythm of managing and building your elasticity will be the key here. If you can keep using your abilities off cooldown and keep slapping enemies with your primary, then you can get a new big guy form, or at the very least a new set of shields several times a fight. When you really get into the flow, then you're practically unstoppable. At a certain point, I found myself rarely staying in big guy form for more than 1 or 2 hits, after which I would swap to the small guy to use the shields and to use my abilities and hit enemies that are much farther away. You can pre-rev your big guy mode by using your secondary and then humping a teammate twice, which puts you at 90 elasticity, which you then can trigger with another secondary. I like to do this if I'm ulting in the next fight out of spawn, or if I'm taking a strange portal and I need to be big guy, or ult as soon as I come out of it. I did mention that you could body block with the rubber body, but you can also body block as a big guy. Because of how easily you build health, it makes a lot of sense, especially if you're protecting someone from a melee attack or a very close range attack, since the attacker is bound to be close enough in your range. Since big guy mode adds additional bonus health, it makes the most sense to make sure you trigger it right before using your ultimate so you don't get melted in the middle of it. And Mr. Fantastic's ultimate, Brainiac Bounce, lets him enter Gear 4. He flies up into the sky, starts bouncing down onto the ground repeatedly. Any enemies within a 10-meter radius of the hit will take a little bit of damage and receive a bit of a slow. The ultimate has a minimum of 3 bounces, assuming you don't get killed or stunned while doing them, and a maximum of 6. After the first 3 initial bounces, hitting an enemy gives you another bounce. If you don't hit an enemy with your bounce past this point, then the ultimate gets cancelled after you land. Since the ultimate has a 10-meter radius, this means that it not only will hit enemies surrounding you as it lands, it also means it deals damage in a dome. This means that it will also hit enemies that are airborne within the ultimate dome per slam, and if you end up hitting a high ground above them, assuming they have line of sight to you and that they aren't too far below, so let's assume you hit a top of a fence or something, then it will hit them as well. This means that you don't necessarily need to land next to or on top of your target to deal damage, which is very risky in some situations, especially if you're trying to kill, let's say, a mantis who can just AoE stun you, but you can land on small walls or high grounds to deal damage safely that way instead. If you activate the ultimate underneath a low ceiling or bounce it into somewhere lower where it blocks you from going all the way up, then the ultimate will start bouncing down as soon as it hits the ceiling, meaning it will go way faster, and if used correctly, it can blow up enemies that are inside of certain rooms. It is worth noting that shields and barriers block the damage from the bounce, meaning that if you bounce on someone but they're behind a shield, then it won't actually count towards your total bounces. As for damage, the bounce deals 50 damage per default, and every bounce you land adds another 10 damage to it, up to a total of 100 damage per bounce by the last one. This means that you can wipe an enemy support in about 4 to 5 bounces depending on their abilities and existing health, and if you use your ult in the middle of the enemy team, then that damage really adds up, and while you might not get kills on your own, depending on your abilities, the ultimate also slows enemies, adding an additional 10% movement slow per consecutive bounce on the same enemy, up to 60% a bounce. If you use your ult in the middle of the enemy team, then that damage really adds up, and while you might not get the kills on your own, it certainly makes the enemy team a lot more squishy and easier to hit, which helps your teammates clean up for you. The Brainiac Bounce also cancels a lot of abilities, especially your big guy mode, and a mistake I see a lot, that I even still do myself if I get a little bit too excited, is getting 100 elasticity and then popping the ultimate way too early. Getting big guy before ulting is paramount, and letting the animation play out so you actually get the health, because if you don't let the animation play fully, then you're gonna end up ulting with 100 elasticity, but without the additional shields, and odds are you'll just die. Generally speaking, you probably won't get that many kills with this thing unless you catch somebody off guard, but as you keep bouncing, you will usually see a low health target or support out of position, and without cooldowns, pinging and even calling that you are going for them with your ultimate can make a huge difference, especially if you have good DPS or flankers. The ultimate is also an insane tool for stalling the points, since most enemies don't really look up or try to deal with you, and if you jump over their heads, then most players will struggle to keep following you as they keep having to turn around. Most destructibles, like the spider nest or the onk, do count as resets for the ultimate, so when you are using your ultimate, then it might be worth to bounce on these destructibles to give your team a higher winning chance, not just because destroying these are very good, not just because somebody does have to destroy these destructibles, but jumping on these destructibles lets you get a slightly different position and more stacks for higher damage as well. As of Season 1, Mr. Fantastic also has a team up with Invisible Woman. Activating this team up converts missing health back into bonus health, filling up the health bar with bonus health until it is full for a maximum of 100 bonus health. According to the description, the team up also has a damage reduction, but there is no mention of that in the official resources that they give us, and when we tested it in the firing range, it doesn't seem like you take less damage whether you have Invisible Girl or not, or whether it is active or not, but it will give you health back after you do take some damage, so it's worth keeping in mind. The team up is pretty great though, especially if you pop it right before you use any of our abilities, like your rubber form. It helps a lot if your healers can't get to you, since it tops you up with additional bonus health. Be careful when using this though, since unlike your other abilities, this one cannot be animation cancelled or cancelled by popping any other ability like rubber form. So if you use this when the pressure is hot, odds are you're gonna get animation locked and die mid team up animation without actually getting to pop your rubber form or even big guy. Overall, it is very important to realize that Mr. Fantastic isn't a duelist. He is not a damage dealer, and even though he can output a lot of consistent damage if unchecked, his job is to peel and support his team, either by helping the front line with damage, crowd control, and shields, or helping the back line and damage dealers by throwing off divers and providing shields. Expecting Mr. Fantastic to be out fragging is a very common misconception that I keep seeing in my grind to Grandmaster, and some people would say, yeah, you can just go and kill the supports with big guy, but you know, the supports can peel themselves, they can stun you, and if you play in a free support meta, or if they get peels from their teammates, you're not gonna get much done on your own. In short, he is an off tank, and he shines through if it has someone to play off of. That could be a Captain America or a Magic that do dive, then you can play with them, but on its own, he can't do too much. So if you get some space, you get into a brawl fight, then odds are you can be the decider to win the fight. But it's hard to open up the game on your own as Mr. Fantastic without good tanks or DPS. It's sort of the type of hero you could pick if you're already winning, as it will make you win harder. But if you are losing, if you are on the back foot, you're going to struggle a lot because it's very hard to make something for yourself. I would say that Mr. Fantastic struggles without having the proper team. If there's enough damage in the team that either follows up on his constant barrage of fisting, or at the very least provides even more damage to whittle down the enemy team, then he can do pretty well in a 2-2-2 composition. Having two tanks makes my life as a Mr. Fantastic a lot easier, since it lets me focus on peeling rather than having to worry about the front line, back line, and everything in between at all times. Another decent comp that I've seen can be solo tank with triple DPS, assuming that the front tank can stay alive and that the other DPS are good enough to pull their weight. This comp puts a lot more stress on Mr. Fantastic. I've seen some people suggesting a triple support composition. It is a meta comp, but from my experience, Mr. Fantastic doesn't really benefit from that many heals on account of being mostly bonus health, which can't really be healed up anyways. It can be good to help keep up that single tank, but picking it just for Mr. Fantastic is a bit silly. Personally, I want to say that having a hit scan is amazing and helps counter the weak points in Mr. Fantastic's kit, especially certain flyers. Having a Hela or even a Punisher makes it super easy to play Mr. Fantastic, since they can take care of the flyers, which lets me focus on the ground, and they deal a ton of damage, which helps me deal with the fact that I don't deal that much myself. A problem hero for me can be someone like Hawkeye, surprisingly, even though he has such a poor win rate, since he can one-shot Mr. Fantastic in small form, so try staying clear off of him or only pushing him when your team is backing you up. He will melt you instantly. Punisher can also be a problem if you're going for a straight duel, and generally, I guess tank busters can be hard to deal with. I would also look out for Penny. Due to your low damage output, it is almost impossible to take down the spider nest as a Mr. Fantastic, and in most cases, you end up dying to the spiders or the mines or the enemy team focus before it even reaches half health. Not to mention that the hidden mines and spiders basically turns you into a free kill when you ult. Be careful when you're ulting if there's a Penny, because there's usually not much you can do. I do want to add that Mr. Fantastic does counter out a lot of the heroes as well. I briefly mentioned a few when explaining the abilities, but if you play anti-dive, then Mr. Fantastic can easily shut down problem heroes like Black Panther, Magic, Hulk, or really whoever jumps into your backline. Just by giving the dive target shields and then stunning the diver, then you're usually successfully peeled enough for them to finish the kill on their own. And as for bans, as I have been doing my climb, I really just focus on getting Storm out of the game by banning her as soon as I started hitting Diamond. She's been proven to be a big problem for most players in most compositions, and I can't do anything about her as long as she is in the air. Taking Storm out of the equation and maybe even Hulk or Iron Man makes it easier for me to stay alive and actually have an impact. That being said, Storm is generally just a good hero and will probably be banned a lot anyways, case, I've found that Wolverine is probably one of the biggest problems heroes for me in the higher elo, since I rarely have a counter for the yoink. If he yoinks one of my teammates without a Magneto bubble, then I can pull Wolverine back and save my teammate, even though they'll still be out of position. But if the Wolverine yoinks me, especially if I'm in big guy form, or he just forces a 1v1, I am dead. If Wolverine sits on me, then I am unable to even duel him in the first place. And yeah, so just avoid Wolverine as much as you can. But yeah, that is how to play Mr. Fantastic, so hopefully you can try him out and have as much fun as possible. Though, here is a tip: have something strong to drink before queuing up to deal with all of the barrage of hate you are going to receive for playing him in ranked. Anyways, hope this helps. If you guys want to get better at Marvel Rivals or see some of my gameplay in action, check out the video on the screen. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time. Peace out.